Yeah, I think there was one where no, like oh yeah, the one with the Russian houses, like oh yeah, I was I was like Russian console.
Do we not have a class start that Wednesday or Monday?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we will.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you all this rainy afternoon. A couple of housekeeping things before we get into our topic for today. First up, the Middle East Center is sponsoring a town hall where you can talk to Washington state lawmakers. I think particularly they're interested in an input from students from the area of the Middle East, but I think all students' input is welcome. And you can actually talk to people who have power about what they're doing, which I think is interesting. So if you're interested in that, the information is here on this slide. It's Monday, December 1st. So right as we're getting back from Thanksgiving break. So I don't know how y'all will feel about that, but there it is if you're interested. Okay. So we remember where we are in our third unit, our unit on the modern Middle East and Horn of Africa. So we're now in week 8. So we don't have a whole lot left of our quarter. So last time we were talking about the modern Horn of Africa with Dr. Worku. Tell your neighbor why is the Horn of Africa important in the modern world? What do you remember about what we talked about? Tell someone near you.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you all remember? What's something that makes the horn important? Yes, Connor.
It's by the Red Sea, so it's an important player in world trade.
Yes, so we talked about how so much of the world's trade goes through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal that leads into the Mediterranean Sea, right? And so the Horn of Africa is right by the kind of entrance, the southern entrance of the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb. And so that's something very important. What else? Yes, Caleb.
Kind of to expand on that, there's like an interconnectedness of trade and in the process of getting that trade up through the Suez Canal, primarily being like oil. So they don't produce a lot of own agriculture. So they rely on Egypt to give them Egypt and the Sudan to grow food and ship the food. And they require the water from Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa to grow the food. So it's just this big circle of interconnectedness.
Yes, yes. So Dr. Worku was talking about how some of the main headwaters of the Nile are in the Horn of Africa in the Ethiopian highlands. And that water is what goes through Sudan. It's what goes through Egypt. And so Egypt is very reliant on that water just for their civilization. Sudan is very reliant on that water for agriculture. And Sudan's agriculture feeds a lot of the Middle East. That's absolutely right. Anything else you guys remember that particularly stood out for you as like significant about the Horn of Africa and what Mahari was talking about? Yes, Sasha.
I thought it was really interesting how he mentioned like Ethiopia's like strength to be able to ward off foreign powers and like colonialism, and like especially with like Somalia being sponsored by the Italians and how they were able to call on like Russians for their support and fight them off. It's pretty cool.
Yes, yes. That was all very interesting. So Ethiopia is one of the few parts of Africa that was never colonized. But the different colonial powers did kind of come around the edges, around the coast. And so Italy and France and Britain all had pieces of Somaliland, right? And they're trying to move in, but that's unsuccessful. That's right. Absolutely. Anything else that stood out to anyone you want to remind us of? Okay. I thought it was super cool, so I hope you guys also enjoyed it. All right, I want to highlight one of our upcoming assignments, our culture fair, since I have you guys all today. So our culture fair is something we're going to do on our last day of class, so that last Wednesday of class, all right? So what you're going to do is you're going to choose an artist or musician or filmmaker or actor or other type of media maker or a great work of art from the Middle East or Horn of Africa. I have a list here you can choose from, or you can propose something that you think should be on this list that is not. I got some help from my colleagues in the milk department to make this list, but I'm sure there's way more people that could be on this list that aren't. So over our break today, I'll spread out these papers. You guys can pick people, or you can propose people who aren't on this list, okay? Or works. So what are we going to do once we've picked our topic? We're going to research that person or work of art a little bit, and you're going to make a flyer explaining who or what this person is or what this work is and what's cool about them. There are more details on Canvas. There are more details on Canvas on what you should include. And you're going to want to bring about 20 copies of your flyer to the culture fair, and you're going to want to turn in a digital copy of your flyer on Canvas. Your flyer, it just needs to be front and back of one page. It doesn't need to be super fancy. Just give me some important information about your topic, some relevant pictures. Like, for example, imagine that you pick someone who's a painter, okay? So maybe on the front, you're going to tell me something about this person's life, about their work. Maybe on the back, you're going to have a picture of one of their famous pieces, and you're going to be prepared to tell people, like, what is this a picture of? What does it mean? Kind of thing, right? So hopefully this will not be a super stressful assignment. Now, I can make copies for you in black and white, but this is like a last resort to ask me to make copies for you. I have posted on Canvas all of the locations on campus where you guys can print stuff and the page that explains how to print stuff at those locations. So if at all possible, please do that. The last time I had a similar assignment, I went to the copier to make copies and the copier was broken and I spent 45 minutes fixing the copier. And I finally did get it to work, but it was very stressful and I thought that nobody was going to have their flyers. So if at all possible, do it yourself. But in case of last resort, I can maybe copy for you. And what you're going to do is you're going to bring your flyer to the culture fair. One second. You're going to bring your flyer to the culture fair and you're going to be prepared to talk about it for about 3 to 4 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the class into thirds. And 1/3 of the people will sort of form a big circle around the classroom, and everybody else will kind of go around and hear what they have to say. So you're not going to stand in front of the whole class at one time and give a presentation. Instead, people are going to kind of come around, they're going to get flyers, they're going to hear what you have to say, right? So hopefully it should be a lower stress situation, if that makes sense. And so we'll have kind of 15 people go, and then 15 people go, and then 15 people go. Yeah? Okay, you had a question.
Is it fine with like the flyers can be black and white?
Yes, that's totally fine. Black and white is totally fine. Yes, Sasha.
Like necessary, can we make like flashcards for like, to like?
Yeah, whatever you need to do. Most people usually find they have enough on their flyer to talk from, but if you need more than that, that's totally fine. Yeah, whatever makes sense to you. Other questions about this assignment and how it's going to work? Yes. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a hand. Any other questions? We're all happy? We feel like this is doable? Okay. So this is what we're doing instead of a final exam. So hopefully this will be significantly less stressful than a final exam. And hopefully we will all learn a lot about a lot of cool things. I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna bring some interesting Middle Eastern food, so it should be fun. Okay. All right, we already kind of looked back on Horn of Africa. So as you guys know, today we're going to be talking about stories of Israel and Palestine. Israel and Palestine. So what's our kind of plan for today? We're going to start by kind of setting up the problem. How have we kind of ended up where we are today? What's happened in history? And we're going to talk about our readings and about the experiences of different people who are Israeli, who are Palestinian, and what that has looked like, okay? And then in our second half of class, we're going to try to kind of think through what's happening in the modern conflict. Now, I want to give you guys a caveat before I start. As you guys know, my specialty is the ancient world. This is a little bit far from my specialty, but I thought it was important and I wanted us to have a chance to kind of have a discussion about it, right? So we're going to do our best to kind of talk through some of this in a kind of as low-key a way as we can manage for something that's very close to a lot of our hearts. And so we're going to do our best today. Feedback is appreciated if you think there are things we can improve for the next time we teach this class, right? So we remember that we want to be kind of looking at primary sources. We want to be looking at these situations. And our first step is to try to understand where people are coming from. We want to understand the choices that they're making within their context. And once we've understood, only then do we want to move on to any kind of evaluation, right? I feel like this is a particular issue where very often people don't really understand what's going on and move immediately to the evaluation part. We want to understand before we start making decisions. Okay. All right. So this is kind of our plan. So let's start by setting up the problem. So as you guys know, things have not been going super great in Israel and Palestine over recent years. So how did this happen? How did we get here? Okay, so we're gonna start, and you may think this is pretty far back, but we're gonna start with some historical background, right? And we're gonna try to tie it back to what we've talked about in previous lectures. So we talked about the Crusades, we've talked about the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, we've talked about some different stuff. We're gonna try to tie it back to what we've talked about previously, right? Okay, so let's think about Jewish experiences before about the 1880s. As we've talked about before, the Jews kind of had mixed experiences in the various Islamic kingdoms and empires of the world. Sometimes they were in pretty good shape. Sometimes they were a protected class as being monotheists, even though they weren't Muslims. And sometimes they were persecuted, sometimes quite unpleasantly, right? We've also kind of talked about how they are also having mixed experiences in Catholic European countries. In particular, I want to point out during the Crusades, when, there's all this rhetoric about the Muslims, there also ended up being a lot of rhetoric against the Jews. And some of the people who are preparing to go on crusade or who stay home and don't go on crusade are murdering large numbers of Jews. Okay? And also, we talked about the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, but there were actually previous expulsions, or at least partial expulsions, of the Jews from England, France, and Austria. So these are all places that at some moment in their history said, we don't want Jews to live here. Okay? So what this all means is the Jews were almost never a majority in any town, and they're rarely treated as first-class citizens of any country. Now, this, of course, leads to a situation where they would like to find somewhere to live where they're safe. So we get this kind of early Zionist movement where they're thinking, we want our own country where we don't have to worry about someone else's laws, the laws of someone who's a different religion who might persecute us. We would like to have our own place where we can be safe, where we can protect ourselves. That's what we want. These early Jewish Zionists were kind of looking all over the world. They're like, where could we possibly start our own country that we would be okay? And actually, a lot of those early considerations were in Africa. So Kenya, Uganda, Madagascar. They also thought maybe Argentina, maybe somewhere in North America. I mean, North America has a lot of space. Maybe we can have some of that, or Palestine. So all of these were options that they're kind of considering. Okay? Dr. Worku actually found some very interesting stuff for me about when they were thinking about maybe living in Uganda. Anyway, but over time, there's a thing that happens. It's kind of unfortunate. So Britain has this prime minister who's a very particular type of Christian called a premillennial Christian. We're not going to worry too much about what that means. But anyway, he believed that in order for Jesus to come back and judge the righteous and the wicked, there first needed to be an actual nation of Jews in Palestine. So he's believing this. A lot of people around him who are also premillennial Christians are believing this. And so when the Jews are kind of looking around, they're like, where should we go? Obviously, we have some attachment to Palestine, but we're also thinking about these various options. He's like, okay, Britain, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, we're kind of in control of this region. That's something we've talked about before, right? And he's like, yes, we're going to really support the Jews settling in that area. Look at this map. This should look like a familiar map. We've seen it a couple of times. Tell your neighbor, what do you remember? What is this map showing? This is a 1916 plan map. Tell your neighbor, what is this map showing and why is this kind of problematic? Okay. What do y'all remember? What is this map showing us and why might this be problematic? Caleb.
It's the division of territories of the former Ottoman Empire by Western imperial powers, specifically England, where Britain was a large player in dividing up making deals with other powers about who would get what.
Okay, so this is kind of a plan that the European powers were making. How are we going to kind of divide up who's in charge of what part of the former Ottoman Empire? And so the yellow is Italy, and the sort of purple is a mix. This sort of they have three colors of purple, but there's a particular shade of purple. This shade of purple is British. The blue is mostly French. And so they're kind of making this plan for what they want to do so that they all have access to what they want to have access to, right? Now, why is this problematic? Haley.
They're not consulting people who actually live there, and they're just ignoring cultural and language and religious kind of values of the people. They're just dividing it based on, oh, what resources do I want from my country?
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of consideration of the kind of local people groups and language groups and cultural groups and religious groups. They're making this plan based on their own considerations. That's right. So, and you guys can see that originally they're saying, okay, this area here is going to be under British, French, and Russian protection. So everybody wanted a piece of the pie around Jerusalem. And then there was going to maybe be an Arab state, but under British kind of protection, right? You can put that in quotes, around here. And so that's maybe their original plan. They do revise this multiple times over the next decade. So we have this kind of initial situation where eventually Britain ends up basically in control of this. The French and the Russians kind of lose their piece. And so the British are in control of this region for a couple of decades. Now, as we do our whole discussion, kind of starting now and then throughout our discussion, I want us to remember a couple of things. One of the things I'm going to do today, we're going to talk about this area in terms of things like space and population, not because these are the only ways to talk about this, but because these are more objective things to talk about, and we can talk about why these things present challenges. Okay, so this area, the sort of Israel-Palestine area, is about 8,630 square miles, which is to say you could fit this into the state of Washington 8 times. So this is not a big country, okay? It's not a lot of space until you have someone who is a neighbor, right? Now, between 1882 and 1948 is when Israel is going to become independent. But in that kind of 50-year period, about 557,000 Jews immigrated to Palestine, partly due to their Zionist beliefs of some of them, but also because things were getting worse and worse in Eastern Europe for them. And they were seeing that's not a safe place for us to be. But the British are supporting Jews moving to this area. They're like, okay, maybe we're going to be protected. This seems like a good idea. Now, I want you to just think for a minute and imagine that you live in a very small space, so about an eighth of the size of Washington, and you're a farmer, and you now have 557,000 new neighbors. Tell your neighbor how you're going to feel about this. Might be a mixed reaction. Tell your neighbor how you're going to feel. What do you guys think? What might be kind of challenging about this? Yeah.
The people that would be coming into Palestine, they have grown up in a European context. They have European ideas of how things are done. Even if they were persecuted, that's just the culture that they've been like set in for generations, so they're not gonna share as much cultural, baggage with the rest of the people that their neighbors that they just moved into.
Okay, so we're going to have some cultural differences that we're going to have to navigate. Absolutely. What else? What else could be challenging about this? What did you talk about? Yep, go for it.
There's also just gonna be, there's only so much land that can go around. And some of this land's been in people's families for generations or more. You know, how do you partition that? How do people make a living for that? So there's gonna be conflict over the availability of resources again, as there always has been.
Yes. So we're going to have issues like of agricultural land. Is there going to be enough agricultural land? Yeah.
Also like we were talking about like conflicts with the native people who live there as well, so like kind of what he was saying, like territory disputes and just overall like clashing of ideas and needs as well, you know.
Okay, yeah. So there's going to be a lot more people now needing to use the same resources. We're now competing over the water. We're competing for the agricultural land. And it is mostly a case of if you want to do agricultural, you need to buy agricultural land from somebody during this time. But it's still like a lot more people. And I think we've talked about before the fact that there's not that much super great agricultural land in this area. A lot of this area, we've got kind of a desert down here where you're probably doing either more kind of pastoral nomadism or not much at all. Or there's some very high hill country through here where you can only do very specific types of agriculture and it's very labor intensive. And so this all kind of creates a problem. Also, there were quite a lot of people through here and are to this day, to some extent, there were people who were pastoral nomadic. We've talked about pastoral nomadism before, right? And now if you have all these people settling, you're going to have a hard time doing your pastoral nomadism, right? So there's some challenges here that we're starting to feel. There's starting to be some tension. There's starting to be some conflict. So jumping forward in time, let's see kind of where this goes. Once Israel gains independence from the British in 1948, we'll talk a tiny bit more about how that happens in a minute. We have a situation where they decide Jews from anywhere in the world have what's called a right of return. This means that if you're a Jew from South America, if you're a Jew from Australia, if you're a Jew from China, if you're a Jew from Europe, if you're a Jew from America, you can say, I want to move to Israel. And they're like, yes, you can come, you can move here, you'll be a citizen. Okay? I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but also, during this time, Israel puts a huge amount of its resources into rescuing Jewish communities which are in danger due to various sources of persecution and bringing them to Israel. You guys read some stuff about this for today. This ends up leading to very rapid immigration of many more people into what, again, is a very small country. So here is a kind of quick overview for you. So we get huge waves of Holocaust survivors from Europe, over 300,000. In the 1940s to 50s, we get huge numbers of Iraqi and Yemeni Jews who are brought in. We get a lot of North African Jews in the 50s. Ultimately, we get a lot of the Jews who came from Egypt, Libya, Syria, Iran, and Turkey. So for a total between 1948 and 1953 of over 700,000 people, which I did my best to check this, but as far as I can tell, this is more people than immigrated and became citizens of the United States of America during this same period. So this is a massive amount of immigration into a country 1/8 the size of the state of Washington. Okay. And then in the 80s and 90s, we had something that Dr. Worku has talked to us before. There were operations to bring Jewish communities out of Ethiopia because they were suffering persecution. And so we have another 22,000 in those operations, and several 100,000 more Ethiopian Jews have come since then. So this is a lot of people. This is a lot of people in a very short time. right? Now, you might look at this and be like, well, couldn't they tell that bringing this many people to a small country in a short time would create, like, couldn't they tell this would create conflict? Did they really need to come to Israel? This might be a question you would ask yourself. But what do our readings for today say? I'd like you to get with your neighbor and talk to your neighbor that there was that first set of readings where you were picking one about Jewish experiences, right? I want you to focus on those and tell your neighbor what kinds of experiences were these Jews from different parts of the world having before they immigrated to Israel. Tell your neighbor what you remember. And if you don't remember or didn't read it, open it up right now and take a quick look. You're going to need your handout at this point. We're on handout question number 1. I'll give you about 5 minutes to look at it and think about it. Tell your neighbor, what are you finding? What kinds of experiences are they having? Okay. What do you guys think about this? On a scale where 1 is everything is totally fine and 10 being this is really, really, really bad, show me on your fingers how you feel about this, the experiences they were at. Yeah, getting a lot of 10s. It was really, really bad, right? It's really, really bad. I tried to read the whole book of Holocaust stories to pick some to give you, and after about 20 pages, I couldn't do it anymore. This was really, really bad, right? It's really, really bad. So clearly they need to go somewhere. They need to go somewhere which is not the place where they are. It's not just the people in Eastern Europe with the Holocaust, right? The people who read the one about the Iraqi Jews, can anyone give us any specifics about what's going on there? What's one thing that was happening that you read about? Yes.
They would get attacked on like holidays.
Yeah. So they're getting attacked on religious holidays. Yes. Yeah. That doesn't sound good. Yeah. Haley.
But if there's a man that doesn't speak about citizenship, they could return.
Yes. So they're like, okay, you guys need to give up citizenship. You're not going to be allowed to come back. If you want to go, you can go. You're not going to be allowed to come back. Yeah. So it's not good. Like all these different places where people are coming from, Iraq, Yemen, North Africa, various places around the Middle East, Ethiopia. It was really bad in all of those places. Okay. It was really bad in all of those places. So clearly they need to go somewhere. Thinking of the Holocaust, the Germans were rebuilding their country and they actually wanted the Jews back to rebuild their country. And the Jews are like, no, thank you. We don't want to go back. And the United States is like, okay, they don't have to go back. But then the Jews are like, can we move to the United States? And the United States is like, oh, we'll take like a couple of people, but we're not going to allow everybody else to come over here. And like a lot of other places in Europe, we're like, we're not going to allow them to come here. We don't want them all coming here. It's like, where exactly do you expect these people to go? Anyway, just to give you this for a second, I'm not imagining that we have any Holocaust deniers in here, but just in case, a lot of people who were involved in the Holocaust on the German side were put on trial and gave testimony. And just to say, this one guy who was in command of Auschwitz, which is probably the most famous of the Jewish, and other people were there too as well, this concentration camp, he estimates that 2.5 million people were executed, 500,000 starved or died of disease, and then the people who did survive were used as slave labor. So it's really bad, right? It's really, really bad. This is what Prime Minister Netanyahu said back in 2009. So quite a long time ago. This is what he said about the situation, okay? For 2,000 years, the Jewish people suffered expulsions, pogroms, blood libels, and massacres, which culminated in a Holocaust, a suffering which has no parallel in human history. If the State of Israel had been established earlier, the Holocaust would not have occurred. This tragic history of powerlessness explains why the Jewish people need a sovereign power of self-defense. I want you guys to think for a second. What do you think about this speech? What seems justified to you? And is there anything in here that you would question? I want you to think about that for a second. How do you feel about what he's saying here? Let's start with what do you guys think is fair for him to say here? What makes sense? Yeah.
Holocaust had no parallel, like it was like one of these massive decimations of like the entire culture.
Okay, so it's this really massive, traumatic, horrible thing. Yeah. Okay. What else? Anything else here you feel is like pretty fair to say? Where like you understand why he's saying that? You feel like this is a pretty understandable thing for someone to say about the situation? Like you understand? Yeah, Caleb.
I will say that he's right that they suffered for thousands of years, and that they should have had an ethnic state of some part. I will not say that there is no parallel in human history for such a large persecution of people.
It's probably true. Yep. If you go through history, you can find humans are awful a lot more than we might like to think. Yeah, that's true. Any other kind of reactions to this, positive or negative? Something to think about? Okay. All right. So I'd like you to think about for a second, if you were someone who'd had these kinds of experiences, why do you think you would want to move to Israel? Like if this had been your background, why would you think moving to Israel would be a good idea? I want you to think about that. Jot down some thoughts under number 2 on your handout. Does this make some sense to you guys? Like if you were someone who is Jewish and being persecuted after the foundation of the State of Israel, do you guys think you might want to move there? Does that make sense to you? You might want to do that? Yeah. Now, I want you to think again. I want you to imagine that you live in a country where your parents came over after the Holocaust, after they'd suffered terrible things, and they came to Israel and you're born there, and all of your older relatives went through the Holocaust. And I want you to imagine that as you're growing older, thousands and thousands more people who identify as being of the same identity group as you are having to be rescued from other parts of the world and brought there because they're also suffering horrible persecution. I want you to think about what that would be like, and how do you think that would kind of affect your worldview and how you might perceive people who don't share your identity? I want you to kind of think about what that would do for a second. And you can jot down some thoughts under number 3, and then we'll talk about that one a little bit. Okay, what do you guys think about this? We can even think about this not even in relation to Israel specifically, but like any country where all the adults you knew when you were a kid underwent terrible trauma. More people are coming to your country all the time who've been persecuted and traumatized. How do you think that would affect your worldview? What do you think that would be like? Yeah.
And being so closely related to people who have negative experience, like hearing their stories and like how they felt what they went through, like that might like gear you towards having a very negative outlook on the rest of the world, and like necessary caution with like trusting outside people and cultures and very like validated. So
Yes, yes. So you might be very concerned about outside cultures and how they might treat you. You'd be like, well, like everybody I know has had super negative experiences with people who are not from my identity group, and it's been really bad. And it really does shape your kind of perspective. Other thoughts on this? What would this do? Yeah, Caleb.
I would be hostile to other people. I would think that I couldn't trust any of them, that they were liars, they would always turn on you whenever it suited them.
Yeah, you might be very hard to trust other people. You might be like, I don't think, or I'm going to trust agreements that their country makes with mine. I might not trust them as individuals. Like when you look at what happened, the American media at the Holocaust was all full of like how terrible this is. This is so bad. And then so many of those people wanted to move to the United States, and the United States is like, no, we have enough people. We've accepted enough that we're not going to take any more. Oh, you guys are on a ship right off the coast. You've been on this ship for months trying to find a country that will let you on to let you live there. No, you go take your ship, go somewhere else. That was what was happening. And it's like, that's not going to give you a positive view of the rest of the world, right? It's not going to make you think these people are going to help us or have our backs, right? So you can see already, this is not a great setup. This is not going to lead to a super healthy kind of cultural mentality that's full of trust and reconciliation. You can kind of already see that we're getting set up for problems here, right? All right. Okay. Now, we have the age-old problem. when people are traumatized, does this always mean that they're going to be super careful not to traumatize anybody else? Is that what usually happens? Unfortunately, that is not always the case. So let's look at this from the other side. We've looked at this kind of from the Jewish side. Let's go to the other side, right? So let's return to 1948 for a second here. Before the British withdrew in 1948, at that point, there were about 630,000 Jews and 1.3 million non-Jews in the region in question, as best I can tell. These numbers, I can't tell if these are exactly right, but this is what I could get. Now, at the time that the British withdrew, the Jews and the local Arabs, is how they usually describe themselves at this time, they were already in the middle of fighting each other. There had already been a lot of skirmishing going on. There had been a lot of tension. They're already kind of fighting each other. Now, the UN, the United Nations, okay, when the British withdrew, they had a plan where they were going to come in and they're going to partition the area into 6 parts and basically give 55% of the area to the Jews and 45% of the area to the non-Jews. That was their plan. Once again, there was a bit of a problem where they weren't necessarily dividing this up based on like where people actually lived or like what part of the country wanted to do what. Once again, they're kind of coming in and they're like, this is our plan. But the plan ends up kind of going out the window. So in the course of the war, the Israelis end up gaining an additional 18% of that territory. And several other countries ended up holding parts of the area. So Egypt at that point held the Gaza Strip, and Jordan, at that point usually called Transjordan, held what's now the West Bank area. Okay. Now, the first thing I want to ask us is, notice that the Jews were going to be given 55%. I want you to look up at those numbers up there for a second and then look down at this number and tell me what you think about this. You guys observe anything here? You see anything about these numbers? I realize I'm asking you to do math, and this isn't math class, but what do you think? Yeah.
I would say it's just usually disproportionate. They're getting over half the land area and they have less than half of the population of, or about half the population of the native non-Jewish people.
Yeah, so they have about, so of the total population, about a third of them are Jews, but they're going to get over half of the area. So once again, something is going on here with what the UN's plan is. So this is already not something that the local Arabs are going to be very happy about. And as we've said, not that much great agricultural land. And who is getting that great agricultural land? Who's getting the port cities and like these kinds of things? It wasn't necessarily a well-balanced plan. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So this is all going on. And then in 1948, we have something that's called the Nakba. The Nakba. Okay. So basically what happens is the Israeli forces go to the Palestinians that are living in their villages that they've lived in sometimes for hundreds of years. And they're like, okay, you're in what's now our territory, so you need to leave or else die. So you need to leave. So basically about 400 Palestinian villages this happened to, and the people there either fled or died. So probably to best estimates, all these numbers are estimates, right? About 750,000 people fled to other areas, about 15,000 died, and only about 156,000 remained in this sort of region, mostly in the area that became Gaza and the area that became the West Bank. Now, we also read readings about this, right? And about this Nakba experience of the Palestinians. So, let's see. Actually, let's take our break before we do this because this is going to take a little while for you to look at that and think about this. So let's go ahead and take our break until 2:31. And if you would like to sign up for a topic for the culture fair, I'll spread these out down here. Get some pencils.
That's right.
Yes.
So I know I actually don't have it. This isn't on list, but I wanted to investigate for the culture poster project. I could do a poster about my grandpa, and his name was Sadak Irani, and he did a lot of like calligraphy and like study, and he did it like with Sufi poetry. So and also like some modern art and stuff. So he has a little online portfolio that had his stuff on it. It was like older stuff from like started like post like 1940s. He started making it. So and then he got a government job making like posters for like the concert hall. I was wondering if I could just do it about him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes. So all of these papers are different, so everybody can have a paper, everybody can pick someone. It's okay to be random about it, it's okay if you have no idea who these people are. We're gonna learn cool things. There's a pencil if you guys need.
People that aren't on the books.
Yes, you can.
Okay, like I have it was a Turkish actor, so I was learning that in my Turkish class today. I think so, okay.
Awesome. Yeah, just email me. I'll put them in the list.
Great.
No, put it back. I'm gonna put it in a sign up online so you can see who you signed up for.
Oh, I see.
Yep. So just sign your name by the person that you want to,
Yeah.
or the work that you want to research. If there's a paper in front of you that you're not looking at, you can hand it back to someone behind you so they can also pick.
Are these lists on Canvas?
Yes,
Okay.
some people find it easier to sign up on paper. It's okay to be somewhat random in your choice.
Actually, put up on mine again. Turn on it.
Oh, do something new. There are some pre-modern ones. I think they're over on the right side. If you want to do pre-modern.
Already done this one. I wrote a paper for President Engel's class on the alley of City at First. So I have the pictures for that one.
Good for you.
I'm randomly applying now. It's not.
Yes.
That not be from this list.
Pardon?
Is that not be from this list?
Also this is all kind of one voice. So you just put your name.
Yeah, whatever you want. Not this list.
You can suggest somebody else, yes.
Do you know who said?
I do not, but just email me and I will.
Thank you.
Yes. If you want someone who's not on the list, that's totally fine. Just email me their name. And I'll put it in.
It's all there. Your own comments. And there's no gray, like a double sided, I'm not bigger, really, double sided, so here's. Then top of it. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it's.
Okay, I'll put this sign up on Canvas also if you'd rather do it that way. And just keep in mind the flyer is due our last day of class. So make sure that you email me if you have any questions or if you have any things you need to talk to me about. Okay. So, as we're coming back, we want to return to thinking about what we read about the Nakba. So, we had a choice of some different Nakba readings, right? So, I'm going to give you guys about 6 minutes to remind yourself of what was in your reading, and you can jot down under number 4 what kinds of things might you have experienced as part of the Nakba based on what you read? Take a look, see what you think.
It's never happened before, but what should I do? Should I just hold on to it during it? Put down here, whatever you. Great.
Tell your neighbor, what's some of the stuff that's going down? What's some of the stuff you might experience if you were a Palestinian during that? So what's going down? What's happening during the Nakba? What are some things you might experience? Yeah.
Travel conditions, and there must have been a lot of like resource scarcity and food scarcity, so considering like 7,000 people died in the one.
Yeah. So there's a lot of resource scarcity. There's a lot of really harsh travel conditions. Here we have a photograph. Like you can see this person is essentially trying to carry their entire, like all their stuff on their back there. You see that giant thing they're carrying there? Because they're not going to be able to come back for it. And so they're trying to walk out of there. Yeah. What else? What else is going on? Yeah, Haley. Yeah, villages are getting completely leveled. The Israelis, they definitely have the superior firepower in this situation. Yeah, so they're coming through with the army. What else? Yeah,
I guess like after they like traveled like their hard experiences, if they didn't settle, I feel like a lot of younger teenagers like they're trying to finish or miss out on a high school education. Either if they had like a family or like a piece of relative that they knew that died, I think they dropped them off at this like place called like Death House, I think. I read it off of something like one of the readings, but they could like claim a body if they recognize like they're like a loved one. I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of exposure to death. A lot of people are losing relatives. A lot of people are losing a lot of relatives. Your whole life is getting uprooted. You're moving to a new place where, you have whatever you could carry with you. You're not exactly set up for a great life in that new place necessarily. So that's not good. And, I want you to imagine that you live with your 83-year-old grandma and you have 4 younger siblings down to an infant in arms, and you and your mom and your grandma are trying to take these kids and walk to another place. Does that sound like a good time? Really does not. So if you had to kind of rate on your fingers, with 1 being everything is great and 10 being this is really bad, how do you feel this is? Yeah, this is also really bad, right? This is also really, really bad. Okay. Okay. My goal is not to cry today. All right. So if we kind of look at where Palestinians went, About 22% of people who identify as Palestinian worldwide are in the kind of what's called the West Bank area. There are various terms, and we're just gonna go with West Bank because we know where that is. So kind of over here. About 15% today were in 2022 in the Gaza Strip, and then there were probably about 12% kind of mixed in this purple area, and then 44% in various Arab countries, kind of in North Africa and around the Middle East, and then 5% kind of in other places in the world. Okay. So they're kind of spread out around the world and living in various conditions. So what about those who kind of stayed behind in this area? What did that look like? Okay. And here I'm definitely having to compress, like this is very complicated what ended up happening. This is just like the very short version. There are entire classes on Israel and Palestine you can take that go into this all in more detail. Anyway, this is the short version. So in 1967, Israel took the Gaza Strip from Egypt and the West Bank from Jordan during the Six-Day War and basically placed them under martial law. What that means is those areas are under military law. They're not under the regular law codes and protections of the rest of the country. Right? So they're being treated as a different area. And they agreed at some point not to settle more Israelis in those areas. Okay, they're basically like, okay, Palestinians can live there. Now, this meant that the Palestinians didn't have the same kind of access to the Israeli judicial system and couldn't vote in elections. They also, based on various factors, may have had difficulties accessing education and other resources, and many of them are poor. Also, I want to point something out to you. Look where the Gaza Strip is, and look at where the West Bank is. If I have a cousin in the West Bank that I want to visit and I live in Gaza, how do I get there? How do I have to get there? Am I in Palestinian territory the whole way? No. So sometimes, some periods in history, that's been a totally fine thing. And at some periods in history, it's all checkpoints and blockades and like, are you sure you need to visit your cousin? Are you sure that's what you're actually doing, that you're visiting your cousin? And sometimes there's very tight border control, depending on when and what's going on, okay? Also, neither of these two places has airports, and they don't necessarily have easy access to get out of that territory into somewhere else, depending on where you are and when you are. Okay, it's very variable. So this doesn't sound particularly happy, right? And this is something that has kind of been known as a problem in the area for a long time. When I was in Israel in 2023, over the summer, there was a lot of protesting going on, and it was mostly Israelis protesting various things that the government was doing. And one of the big things that the Israelis were protesting is the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians. So, like, this is something like the people in the country know it's a problem. People outside the country have known this is a problem. And obviously the Palestinians also know that this is a problem, right? They're not enjoying themselves. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded, and its kind of goal was to represent Palestinians in the region internationally, to kind of be able to give them an international voice, talk to the UN, talk to other groups, talk to Israel. Eventually, they started wanting to do negotiation. And so let's take a look at what ends up happening there. So, for example, in 1993, the Israeli government and the PLO got together and they basically said, we want to try to find a solution. We've been having a lot of conflict. A lot of people are not happy with the situation. various things are happening that are very bad. And so they're saying we want to make a two-state solution. We want to come up with a two-state solution. Does anybody know what a two-state solution is, like in general? What would this be? What is this about? Does anybody know? Yeah, Connor.
It would give Palestinian sovereignty as a state, while retaining Israel.
Yes. So in a two-state solution, there would be a sovereign state of Israel, which has its own judicial system and people are citizens of that state. And then there would be another state, which would be a state of Palestine, where they would have their own citizenship. They would be in control of what happened. And so that's what a kind of the basic of what a two-state solution would be, where there would be two states in this region that each have their own stuff going on. They each have their own law code. They each have their own citizens. They each have control of their own borders. They have maybe their own military, this whole kind of thing. So in 1993, they're saying, we want to find a two-state solution. We've had this really long conflict. We want this to work. And they keep negotiating and negotiating and negotiating over the next 10 years. Sometimes they make a bit more progress, sometimes not so much. But both sides are basically complaining the other side is not willing to agree to crucial points that they need to have happen in order to make this two-state solution. Okay? So, for example, the Palestinian Liberation Organization will not agree to totally and completely disarm, so get rid of their kind of large military weaponry. They will not allow Israel to control their airspace. They will not allow Israel to veto their alliances with other groups. And Israel is not willing to back down on these issues. Israel will not allow Palestinian refugees who left in the Nakba or thereafter to come back. They don't want them coming back. They don't want to guarantee that Palestinians can freely move across Israel. Because remember, we look at our map, you have to kind of move through Israel to get from one of these places to the other, right? They don't want to guarantee that Palestinians will always be able to move across freely. They aren't willing to return certain cities that the Palestinians really want back that historically were mostly Palestinian. And they also don't really want to back down on the illegal settlements that they've been doing against previous agreements, especially in the West Bank. Okay? And the Palestinian Liberation Organization doesn't want to back down on these issues. So look at these issues and tell your neighbor, pick one issue and tell your neighbor why you think the Palestinians and the Israelis could not agree about that specific issue. Tell your neighbor why you think they cared about that issue. Okay. Somebody tell me what you talked about one of these issues. Why are they fighting about some specific issue? What do you think? Somebody in the back. In the back, tell me what you're thinking about one issue. Why do they care? Yes.
I mean, a lot of the points that Israel won't back down on essentially keep Palestine in the same state as they are under Israeli occupation. Like the Israel having control over Palestinian airspace means that Palestine still can't establish their own airports or have like freedom of movement.
Yeah, you can see why the Palestinians are like upset about this. They want to have their own airspace control. Like if they put in their own airport, they don't want to have to ask Israel whether they can have planes land there. Why do you think Israel cares so much about the airspace? Anybody know? Why does airspace matter? I mean, if the United States had a group that we didn't get along with, which there are many in the world, and we gave them control of the state of Washington airspace, like why would that be a concern? Yeah.
So for like bombing like certain territories, like they wanted Israel to let go of that like control because they were concerned about bombing risks and stuff.
Okay, so they're probably both concerned about bombing risks. They're like, we don't want missiles coming through here. We don't want bombing happening through here. And Israel is not willing to trust that the Palestinians are not going to do that, right? So we've talked about like what this kind of setup is. Yeah. So we can see why that might be problematic. All right, jot down some ideas under number 5 on your handout based on what we've been talking about. Okay. All right. So now we're coming to the modern situation. Coming to the modern situation here. We're getting close. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Hamas. You guys have probably all heard of Hamas. Let's talk a little bit about this. So in 2006, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they were holding basically their parliament elections. So they have different parties, just like the United States does, and they were electing people from these different parties to be part of their parliament. And in that election in 2006, Hamas gained a majority of seats. And at that point, the United Nations was kind of upset because over the past previous 15 years, Hamas had been claiming responsibility for a lot of terrorist attacks in Israel. So they had been doing that for quite some time. And so basically the UN, they asked Hamas to officially say that we don't want to be terrorists anymore and terrorism is bad and we recognize that Israel has a right to exist as a nation, and Hamas was not interested in doing that. Okay. Then in 2007, Hamas actually kind of took control of the Gaza Strip and suppressed non-Hamas Palestinian political figures. So there were a lot of people who were not Hamas people before this time who were also part of the political scene. But after this point, things happen to a lot of them. Sometimes it's peaceful things, they just retire, and sometimes not so peaceful. Okay? You can read between the lines there. So 2007 to the present, Hamas has been kind of in control in the Gaza Strip. Now, okay, so after decades of kind of attacks back and forth between Israel and the Palestinians, lots of missiles, lots of smaller scale skirmishes, lots of different things going on. As you guys know, on October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a widespread terror attack on Israel, attacking a lot of farming villages, a lot of different places, and they sort of killed very quickly about 1,200 people, and they took 250 hostage. Okay? So this is really scary. I remember seeing this news on October 7th and having a very clear feeling about how I felt about the situation. And then the situation has continued to develop, right? And so this is very bad and very scary. I want you to remember Israel, an eighth of the size of Washington. It's very small. Hamas came about halfway across the country when they were doing this. So this would be very scary. This would be very scary, okay? I want you guys to imagine that there's a massive terror attack about an hour's drive away from here. How would, like, I want you to just think for yourself for a second how that would feel. Okay? It's not good, right? It's not gonna be happy, right? So Israel responds with an invasion of the Gaza Strip and eventually with bombing attacks and slowly taking over the area of Gaza. Israel has also blockaded Gaza off and on. Do you guys know what a blockade is? I think Mahari talked about this. What is a blockade? Does anybody know? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No aid or anything.
Yeah, so blockade is when you block off roads, when you block off sea access. It's basically putting an area under siege. You're keeping resources from moving in and out, you're keeping people from moving out, you're keeping trade from moving in and out. Why would this be a concern? Like, why, like if someone blockaded the United States completely, it would be very difficult to do, right? But, and it would be somewhat annoying, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? We'd all be like, oh, well, everything is going to be super expensive and we're going to be eating a lot of potatoes and, you know. But why is this end up being a particular concern in Gaza? Yeah.
It's also be more difficult for aid from other countries too.
Okay, so aid from other countries is going to have a hard time getting in there. Also, I want you guys to realize what kind of space is Gaza? Is it like an agricultural space or what is it? What is it there? Okay, it's shoreline. We got a lot of open space to grow potatoes. No, it's city. This is basically very heavily urbanized. They do not grow their own food. They import their own food. This means if you blockade, there is no food. Okay? So this is not great, right? This is very much not great. Okay. So as you guys know, the war has continued till now. Although as of 2 days ago, at least, we were in a ceasefire, for which I'm very thankful. we'll see how that goes. And let's look at some numbers again, because I don't know how else to talk about this, honestly. I don't know what else to do. As of October 2025, Israel reports about 2,000 people total dead in this conflict. And the Gaza Health Ministry reports about 70,000 dead, mostly civilians in this conflict. Now, of course, people argue about how accurate any of these numbers are, but let's just go with it. Let's just go with it, okay? What do you notice about these numbers? Tell your neighbors what you notice.
I mean, somebody's totally different.
What do you guys notice about these numbers?
The one that we're doing from Gaza are talking a lot about civilians, it's counting the civilians. Israel, it's the same sort of dead, which we don't know what number that is including. They're not talking about who they're counting in that number, I guess. So like, are they counting civilians? Are they counting just Israeli casualties? Are they counting just military casualties?
So they're counting all of their casualties so far. So this includes the initial kind of 1,450 people who were either killed immediately or taken hostage, and then many of them died while hostage. Some of them were returned, but not all of them. And then an additional, about 600 people that have died in conflict. And then Gaza Health Ministry, you're right, it's mostly saying civilians. Okay. Anything else you guys notice about these numbers? There's the kind of really obvious thing, right? It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Okay. So what do we do with this? What in the world do we do with this? Let's try to think about, let's try to put ourselves in the shoes of Prime Minister Netanyahu and company. What do you think is the perspective that you would need in order to continue a war in this kind of situation, where we're having this high number of casualties on the other side, many of whom are civilian? I mean, you can argue about what proportion is civilian. Like, obviously, you can argue about all these things, but like, what perspective is it that is making them say this is a good idea? Okay, I want you to think about that for a second. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I know specific, because a lot of pressure from this government that if he's attacking, they're gonna like kind of kick him out, like all the really conservative religious people in the government. So he has that pressure to keep attacking.
Yeah, he is kind of the head of the Likud coalition in the Knesset, in the kind of Israeli parliament. And there is a lot of push from that kind of side of politics to keep going with things. Yeah. I think he's also on board with continuing it, honestly, at this point. What's that perspective? What's that perspective? What would make you want to do this? Yeah.
He also has a lot of like relations with other powerful entities, which help them in like return, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So international politics may also be playing into this. But we can also think about this. in Gaza, there definitely are some percentage of people who support Hamas and are like, yes, we want the Israelis to go away so we can have all of Palestine back. There definitely are some people with that perspective. And so basically the argument that seems to be being made on the Israeli side is until we get rid of all those people, we aren't safe. The Israelis aren't safe until we get rid of these people, right? Problem is, how do you find those specific people? And are they finding it acceptable for people who aren't in that group to also be dying? This is kind of where the problem is, right? So it is indeed very difficult to identify those people, to find those people, to stop those people. But is this the way we want to deal with the situation? Anyway, okay. So this is kind of the perspective that I think we're getting here. It's very much a perspective of where the leaders are thinking, we're the only ones who can defend the Israeli people. We have this long history of people elsewhere in the world not having our backs or doing terrible things to us. And so basically, it is up to us. We are the only ones who are going to be able to solve this problem. And because nobody else really has our backs, it's not our responsibility to care about people who aren't Israeli, to care about people who aren't part of our group, right? Somebody else can do that. Our priority is going to be, we're going to protect our people with a strong offense until we feel safe, okay? I think this is basically what's going on. What's kind of the issue with this? What's the issue? Yeah.
It's like no humanity, there's like no empathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Due to their past experiences, they can't fully trust anyone,
Mhm.
so as a result, they have to claim like self-sufficiency, and if their allies turn on them, they have to be able to stand up.
Yeah. Yeah. So they have this really awful historical situation they've experienced. And so they're like, we really have to be the only ones who could do this. We have to be ready to stand on our own. But they're very much having to basically say, those people over there, I'm not going to treat them as human and give them maybe full human rights because I need to make sure my people have those full human rights. And that's what I'm going to prioritize. And that's kind of where I think what's going on. So I'll just sort of put this up in front of you. This is from the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Just to sort of point this out to you that this exists and this is something that Israel has agreed to and that was on that I think the PLO initially agreed to back in the day. Just to sort of put this here. Sort of know that this exists. This is something a lot of countries in the world have agreed to, are human rights. Okay. Okay. So as you guys can see, the situation is really bad, right? It's kind of set up to be really bad in a variety of ways. There's been this long, nasty history of what has happened. There's been recent history that's been bad of what has happened. As we think about this, and as you kind of think about this to yourselves and make your own judgments about how you feel about this situation, I do want us to avoid demonizing either side. You don't want to look at this and be like, oh, what this side has done is so terrible. They're like, I can't imagine that. They're just so far out there. Nobody should act like you don't want to go in and start treating people as not human for the choices that they've made. Okay. Whichever side. whichever side you're thinking about, okay? I want to remind you guys that not all Palestinians in or out of Gaza support Hamas. Quite a lot of people don't support Hamas. I want to remind you that not all Israelis, and especially not all Jews around the world, like, they don't support this war strategy, you know? When I was in Israel in 2023, I was around a lot of Israeli university students, and none of them were happy about what was going on. But they're the ones who got called up for war in a month after I left. Anyway, and I also want to remind you guys that these kinds of things are going on all over the world all the time. And that doesn't make any of them any better, doesn't make any of them any less terrible. But I think we can kind of get stuck on certain conflicts and be like, okay, we're gonna really be stuck on this particular conflict and how bad these people are to make these decisions. But any country that's been around has done really terrible things. Like, here's a very short list of a few of the terrible things the United States has done. This could be a much longer slide. United States has done a lot of awful stuff. I'm not saying I'm not very grateful to live in the United States, because I am, but like, a lot of really bad stuff has happened. And so we want to remember that all human lives have value, and all these people have value. And we don't want to make the same mistake that some of them are making in not treating others as human by not ourselves treating them as human. Okay, does that kind of make sense? You guys know where I'm going with that? Okay. Now, we now have this really serious problem, right? These different sides, they've both done really terrible things to each other. And the situation is really bad, but they're still all living in a very small area, 1/8 the size of the state of Washington. What in the world are we going to do? There are people on both sides now who are wanting a one-state solution to try to get everybody on the opposite side to either leave or die, right? Depending on how they're kind of positioned and how extreme they are, right? There are people who are wanting that. That doesn't really sound like a solution, right? So what do you guys even think? Like, is a two-state solution even possible at this point? Is what would be your ideal solution to this problem? What's something we could do to make this better? What do you think? Jot down some ideas under number 8 on your handout. Tell your neighbor, Have you come up with the solution to our problem? Anything you think might make this better? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for coming today. I know that was hard. I know that was rough. Thank you for hanging out and thinking this through with me. I tried to be balanced, but I don't know how I did. So feel free to let me know. Come talk to me in office hours, send me an email. Happy to hear what you have to say. You can drop off your handouts up at the front. Yeah, not for me.
It's like, it's lying in my barracks room, the next day we were getting. So. I was. They kind of sent us into Lebanon to. Maryland. Or they done the county. On the lane. Called off the second. It was that close.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, that was not fun.
I left literally 3 weeks.
I stopped watching news while I was. It's just too much, especially when they're like. It goes there, it's all academic. It was like the first thing to die and stuff like, oh, all very, pro-Israel. The kind of thing. They're not the ones that actually go do the fighting. The ones that go do the fighting. The ones that deal with any of the consequences. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about your writing process?
I want to do something like good. That was interesting. Just because the lessons he got me so and I wanted to make it more like sort of my perspective of like, so I made it more so about the meaning, like meaning to do, and yeah, I like to make it more like follow this thing of finding it out. The same Suda that it was about, and like yeah.
Do you use any kind of editing software or anything?
Just Drive, not so much, but just Google Drive.
Does it have any kind of like grammar check or anything that you use, or
It'll fix wording, but like just so if it fits in the sentence, if it's like out of sense or just the words, but I think it change the sentence.
okay. So I just have to ask, and don't feel pressure. I read it and thought it was AI, and I put it in an AI checker, and it thought it was AI also. So can you confirm for me whether or not you used AI in the assignment?
I do use AI. I use Google for some help
Okay, thank you.
That's all I believe.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You too.